The Internet is the defining technology of our time, an historic revolution in communications for the human race that is changing the world.
Well, the Internet is the next big thing. It is on a par with the wheel and fire and language and the printing press.
The Internet enables millions of people with personal computers to communicate and connect. It's email.
You've got mail.
It's news groups and chat rooms. It's also the world's largest marketplace and shopping mall. And it's a link to websites the world over, with information for every aspect of life, and even the life after.
This is, in fact, the telecommunications infrastructure for the 21st century.
But where did the Internet come from? How did it get started? And who built this essential tool and playful toy to millions? And where is it going? This is the age of the Internet, a global network of computer-based communication. At the turn of the 21st century, millions of people around the world are now online every day to exchange messages, conduct business, meet people, and find information. Free from the limits of time, distance, and even tyranny. Computer communication can also be a tool of war to manage materiel and manpower, as the UN coalition did in the war against Saddam Hussein.
If you knew where things were and you knew what was available better than your opponent did, then you could organize your offensive. And I think we learned that lesson pretty clearly in the 1992 Gulf War, where we clearly knew where things were better than our opponents did.
But the Internet is also a vital information link. During the Kosovo crisis, it carried uncensored news past state-owned newspapers, television, and radio, with the real story of the Balkan tragedy. Be it peace or war, the worldwide use of the Internet is practically indispensable. Yet its origins date back only to the 1950s. No invention in history has grown so fast to touch so many lives. In scope, more email is exchanged on the Internet today than first-class letters delivered by the U.S. Post Office. In financial importance, the Internet generated $301 billion in business and was responsible for 1/3 of the total U.S. economic growth in 1998. It is a key component of our culture and civilization, and yet, no one really controls it.
Things that matter the most usually don't have anybody in charge.
The seminal idea behind the Internet was envisioned by a psychologist named J.C.R. Licklider, a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the 1950s.
Licklider's vision was that computers would allow you to communicate better, and that would allow you to connect all the computers together so that they might be more useful in the sharing of information among people.
Computer communication was a flight of imagination far beyond anything at the movies. Computers were portrayed as sci-fi props like electronic brains alongside robots, ray guns, and flying saucers. In fact, the idea of a worldwide communications network of computers was far more imaginative than anything Hollywood came up with. After all, the first computers were monstrously large and expensive devices that were never intended to communicate.
All the computers were as big as a room. You were lucky to have one in a city, or maybe one on a campus, or if you were lucky, one in a room.
They could have remained standalone computing machines for a long time, but a frightening display of Soviet scientific superiority during the Cold War spurred them into teamwork. In October 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik. To catch up and hopefully surpass the Soviets in space technology, President Eisenhower created a bureau at the Defense Department called ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. It was in charge of the space program, which then included computer science. But when the space program got its own agency, NASA, computer research fell into relative obscurity. America turned its attention to conquering the stars and beating the Russians in space.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
While America gave birth to a space program that grew from a crawl to a run by presidential edict, computer communication was in the embryonic stage, but it was making progress. At MIT, a graduate student named Leonard Kleinrock began applying queuing theory to data transmission.
Queuing theory is a fantastic tool for evaluating computer and communication systems. You know, a queue is a very simple structure. It's simply a system to which you arrive, hang around a while, and leave.
Like letters going through post offices, Kleinrock showed how packages of data would queue or line up at the nodes of a communications network as they transited through. This way, he could determine the overall speed of the network. He then showed how to speed up the network by implementing two techniques: demand access and distributed control.
So the point of demand access, you don't get it till you need it, is the key idea for effective resource sharing with data networks. Now, the second principle that I uncovered was the idea that to use distributed control in a network, no one switch, device, authority should control the entire network. Rather, every switch should share in that control. It should decide the routing procedure, it should decide how much traffic is allowed in, where it's going, when to do reassembly, when to do all of the functions in a distributed fashion.
Kleinrock's work was a dawning light on Licklider's vision. It was the aha that computer communication could one day be a reality. It also marked a revolutionary departure from the telephone system's use of a technology called circuit switching.
When you make a telephone call, you pick up the phone and you dial a number. And the switching system that connects you with the other telephone actually creates a circuit between the two machines, between the two telephones. And that connection is dedicated to the conversation. Even if you're not saying anything, the communications path is in place, and it's kept there until one or the other of you hangs up.
The telephone system had an Achilles heel, and still does. If the connection path between telephones is broken, the call is lost. That weakness became a matter of national security to the military in the early 60s, when they feared a Soviet nuclear attack. Besides leveling American cities, the telephone system would be so damaged that the military would be unable to launch a counterattack. To assure retaliation, America needed an indestructible communications network. Paul Baran was hired to see if one could be built.
We started off by playing with fishnet-type networks, so that if you chop it up, there's still a path through the network. Now, the problem was we didn't know how to do that. So came up with the notion of what we call the hot potato routing, sort of a demonstration that it's doable, so the traffic could find its way through the network. But to do that, you had to chop the data up in little pieces.
Hot potato routing meant a message transiting a network got to where it was going, even if part of the network was destroyed. But how? Baran was inspired by a previous study of mice in a maze.
Claude Shannon, in 1952, built a machine that modeled a mouse finding its way through a maze. And said, well, if we could model a mouse going through a maze, then we should be able to do the same with information. So the information flows along in each of the packets that's necessary to find its way through the network. That's the key.
Next, borrowing an idea from the telegraph, Baran decided to chop up each message into small, equal-sized pieces, called packets. Each packet was like a postcard, with a to and a from address.
Each packet gets a header put on it, which says where that packet wants to go, and you launch that packet into the network, and it goes hop, hop, hop through the network, followed on the heels by the other packets. And they may take different paths, but no dedicated path is constantly available for them. They'll find their way along paths that are available.
Then, Baran allowed each node to decide where to send each packet as it traversed the network. A node was like a post office that knows where next to send a postcard as it continues its way from sender to recipient. But unlike a post office, a node would keep copies of the packets and keep sending them out until they arrive successfully at the next node. This design for a network, a packet switching network, gets its messages through better than telephones as long as some part of the network functions. The telephone system, which relies on dedicated circuits, fails when circuits are broken. By 1962, there was enough research and theory to show that a viable computer network could be built. But implementing one had to wait 7 years, until 1969, coincidentally the same year man first walked on the moon. While this space triumph grew out of a national fear of Soviet domination, the first computer network stemmed from the frustrations of a single ARPA scientist, Bob Taylor. On September 2, 1969, the first message was sent between nodes on the Arpanet. It was also the first Arpanet crash.